Well, hello and welcome back to Sheaff Math. In today's lesson, we're going to be learning about one-step equations, and we're going to be using the addition and subtraction properties. Now, what does a one-step equation look like? Well, here's an example of one. We have an x, a letter, plus 5 equals 8. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve for x. Okay, we're trying to figure out what number goes into there. Now, one-step equations come in all shapes and sizes. Some have minuses, some have different letters. Sometimes the letter is on the right side, that variable, and so sometimes we're dealing with negatives too. And so let me ask you this. I'll bet you that you don't remember doing one-step equations when you were in first grade, and I can bet that you'll remember now. Do you remember this? Well, way back when, we used to do one-step equations, very basic, and what you had to do is you had to count on your fingers to figure out what number, when you add 5 to it, makes 8. And you counted on your fingers and you found out that it was 3. And so some of those we can do in our heads now, and so they're not too tough. But now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be presented with a place value, a variable, a letter. And so ours is going to be x. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you a method in solving for this without having to do it in your head. So let's take a look at an example. All right, x plus 7 equals 10. And I'm sure that some of you can figure out what answer that is. But I'm going to show you a method. And so we're wanting to solve for x. So our final answer will be x equals some number. And so with an equation, what we want to do is we want to get x by itself. And so x is there with plus 7, and so I want to get rid of plus 7, and so what I do is I do the opposite of plus 7. I undo it, and so what I'm going to do is subtract 7. But what I do on one side, I have to do on the other, and so I'm going to subtract 7 on both sides. By doing that, I cancel out that plus 7, and I'm left with my x at the bottom. And then 10 minus 7 is 3, and you have your answer. And if you want to go back and check, 3 plus 7 equals 10, and so you're correct here. Here's another example, g plus 12 equals 30. All right, so we're wanting to solve for g, and we have a plus 12 there, so we want to undo it by subtracting 12 on both sides. That cancels the plus 12 out, and we end up with g equals 18. And if you added 18 and 12, you would get 30. That's your final answer. Sometimes you have minus in there, and so if you want to undo a minus 9, you do the opposite of it, which is plus 9. And so we're going to add 9 to both sides, canceling out that negative 9 and leaving us with just the p at the bottom. And 5 plus 9 is 14. And there's our final answer. Now we are going to add 13 to both sides to solve for h, because we want to undo that minus 13. And so that cancels out the minus 13. And we're left with h equals 23. Now, sometimes the variable is on the right-hand side, and so you do the same thing. You want to get that x by itself, and so we're going to undo that plus 6 by subtracting 6 on both sides. And so by doing that, we are left with an x on the right, and 11 minus 6 is 5. But when you put your final answer down, you always want to make sure you have x equals your answer. And so that's 5. All right, and 5 plus 6 equals 11. Now let's look at some tougher problems. These are ones that you're going to come across eventually, and so you might as well take a look at a few examples. So this one right here, we're dealing with some negative numbers. And if you haven't dealt with negative numbers, you probably want to learn those first and then come back to this part of the video. So we want to undo the plus 10 to get our x. And so we're going to subtract 10 on both sides, canceling the plus 10 out, and we're left with x equals, and a negative 7 and a negative 10 makes negative 17. Okay? All right, so here's another one that's going to be negative answer. We're going to subtract 12 on both sides, canceling out that plus 12, and we get w equals negative 5. So you're going to see a lot of negatives in the future, so be aware of them. Sometimes we have large numbers like this that there's no way you can do in your head. Well, it'd be a lot. Anyway, we want to add 122 to both sides to undo that negative 122, and we're left with x equals 845. And if you put down the calculator, 845 minus 122 is 723. Sometimes we have decimals, and so the same method applies. We are going to add 5.2 to undo that minus 5.2. Cancel that out. And x equals, hopefully you know how to add decimals, 21.1. And last but not least, the toughest one of all is when you have fractions. Now, hopefully you know how to add and subtract fractions, because we are going to have to do that. We want to get that, undo that plus 1/2, so we're going to have to subtract 1/2 on both sides, canceling that out. So what's 3/4 minus 1/2? Well, if you don't know that in your head, which not many people do, we are going to go off to the side and do our problem. We're going to get the common denominator, so we'll change that 1/2 to 2/4, and we subtract the top, and we get 1/4, which is our final answer. All right, well, there are one-step equations with addition and subtraction, and I tried to give a lot of examples for you, so I hope you got a lot out of this. If you need more help, I always suggest to rewatch the video and pause it if you need to. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.